All right, guys, we have a lot of developments to get to with regard to Israel. First of all, just breaking really today, the first news came out yesterday, but fully being picked up by the press this morning. The U.S. has decided to push its own version of a temporary ceasefire resolution through the UN Security Council. We can put this up on the screen. It has some of the details. This comes as Algeria had offered a separate resolution that the U.S. is intending to block. So the headline here from Reuters is U.S. proposals UN Security Council oppose Rafah assault, back temporary Gaza ceasefire. We have proposed a rival draft UN Security Council resolution that would call for a temporary ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war and oppose a major ground offensive by Israel in Rafah. According to text seen by Reuters, the move comes after the U.S. signaled it would veto on Tuesday an Algerian drafted resolution that would demand an immediate humanitarian ceasefire over concerns, this is according to our people, that it could jeopardize talks between the U.S., Egypt, Israel, and Qatar that seek to broker a pause in the war and the release of hostages held by Hamas. Until now, Washington has been averse to the word ceasefire in any UN action on the Israel-Hamas war, but the U.S. text echoes language that President Biden said he used last week in conversations with Netanyahu. It would see the Security Council underscore its support for a temporary ceasefire, this is all in quotes right now, in Gaza as soon as practicable, based on the formula of all hostages being released, and calls for lifting all barriers to the provision of humanitarian assistance at scale. I also want to call your attention to what they're reporting the proposed draft says specifically about Rafah, because they don't say, no, you can never do a ground offensive in Rafah. They say that they have determined under current circumstances, a major ground offensive into Rafah would result in further harm to civilians and their further displacement, including potentially into neighboring countries. Let me go ahead and put this next piece up on the screen, because with regard to Rafah, this is incredibly critical. Israel is imminently threatening a full-scale Rafah invasion. For the first time, they set a specific deadline of the beginning of the Muslim holy day of Ramadan, which starts on March 10th. That is per Benny Gantz, who is a member of the Israeli war cabinet, delivering effectively an ultimatum at a Sunday event. He said, and I quote, "The world must know and Hamas leaders must know that if by Ramadan the hostages are not home, then the fighting will continue, including in Rafah." I don't have to tell you guys, but I will remind you again that Palestinians have been pushed south multiple times. Until now, you have the bulk of the population, 1.3 million Palestinians, who are clustered right up alongside the border with Egypt in the city of Rafah. There is nowhere else for them to go. The humanitarian conditions are already appalling. The bombing that was used as like a distraction while Israel rescued 2 of their hostages killed some 60+ Palestinians. So it's not like Rafah is safe right now. But what they're talking about, Saagar, would be another order of magnitude. So, I mean, listen, I don't know what to make of this U.S. move. It is noteworthy that they are going to allow something through the Security Council, that something includes this forbidden word of ceasefire, that it at least expresses concern about a ground invasion of Rafah. But as always, the question is not just what are you going to say, but what are you going to do? What is going to be behind this Security Council resolution to actually try to get to Israel to stop the slaughter here?
Yeah, but obviously the UN Security Council resolution has no authority or ability to enforce anything. It comes down to the member states. But what's his name? Bibi has said repeatedly, if you are saying that we can't go into Rafah, you're saying we can't defeat the enemy. You're saying that we cannot prosecute the war. So which is it? I mean, he's made it very clear that this is something that they're going to do. At the same time, I'm not sure. I mean, maybe this could have some move, because it does show the first time that the U.S. is saying, no, you can't go into Rafah, or at the very least allowing a resolution or something like that to go through. Apparently, the president told Bibi that on the phone. This is a direct contradiction, apparently, of what the Israeli war cabinet wants. In terms of the Wall Street Journal story that I know we read about the Israeli plans to go into Gaza, they say in the coming weeks. There does seem to be some ambiguity here about whether this is going to be allowed through. I was floating a theory with Ryan. I wonder what you think.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if the Israelis and the Egyptians are almost talking a bit behind the scenes as to why the Egyptians would have built that large fence around Rafah for some sort of like refugee containment zone. It could be that they're waiting until something like that has occurred. I genuinely don't know. I haven't seen reporting or something like that to affect. I would not put it past the two governments to do something like that in response to this. So I don't know what all of the chess pieces here mean.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm skeptical of the U.S.'s intent here. I do pick up on the fact that they're not saying you can't go into Rafah. They're saying under current circumstances.
Oh, interesting.
And, you know, Bibi they're already floating like, oh, you guys can build a tent city. And, you know, then I guess the circumstances would be different and then we could go ahead. So I see a lot of wiggle room here. I thought Ryan made a great point in you guys' show yesterday. He said, you know, they're pushing Palestinians up against the border and there's all this pressure on Egypt to allow this Palestinian refugee population into their country. And of course, you know, that is, it's an impossible situation that the Israelis have put everybody into because Egypt, first of all, is worried about political instability. Second of all, is worried about participating in an ethnic cleansing. Palestinians in Gaza, obviously, very fearful that if they left the Gaza Strip, they would never be allowed to return to their homes. You know, an obvious solution is, okay, Israel, if you want to go into Rafah, you can have the tent city in in Israel and house the civilian population, then there wouldn't be the fear of you're not going to let us return to our homes in the Gaza Strip. Obviously, in that instance, they would allow you to return to your home in the Gaza Strip because they don't want you in Israel. So the fact that they put that completely off the table tells you a whole lot about their actual care and concern for the Palestinian civilian population, which is not only none, but as we've documented here, I mean, the clear intent at this point is just devastation, annihilation, pain, suffering, collective punishment of the Palestinian civilian population. And, you know, that has been very clear from the beginning of this offensive in the Gaza Strip. So, you know, it's interesting development, and I have no idea where things go from here. I really don't know if the ceasefire negotiations, the temporary ceasefire negotiations, have any real shot at coming to fruition. I can tell you the domestic pressure on Bibi continues to be in the direction of continuing this thing indefinitely. There had previously been a poll, Saagar, that we covered that Israeli citizens preferred the goal of freeing the hostages over, quote unquote, defeating Hamas. I saw a new poll that had the opposite conclusion, that they put the first priority of defeating Hamas. Bibi, of course, knows the war has to continue for him to continue his hold on power. He needs to bring home some sort of victory, which they have not been able to manage thus far. And so that's where we are. Does this resolution really move the needle without also threatening, you know, we're not going to send the weapons that you need to engage in this offensive. There are going to be other consequences if you do these things that we are asking you not to do. I think that would probably be more consequential, but we haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, that's right.
At the same time, you know, speaking of pressure on Bibi and on the Israeli domestic society, this was quite extraordinary. Put this up on the screen. The Israeli economy on an annual basis shrank at a 20% rate in the final quarter of 2023. So if you extrapolate out the economic crash of the end of 2023 to an entire year, you are talking about GDP shrinking by 20%. It is impossible to explain what a massive contraction that would ultimately be. I mean, we're talking about even beyond the level of things like COVID.
No, it's nuts.
It is absolutely nuts. Let me give you a little bit of the explanation of what happened here. They say the sharp drop in that FT piece was caused in part by the call up of 300,000 reservists who had to leave behind their workplaces and businesses. Other factors to hit the economy included the government's sponsorship of housing for more than 120,000 Israelis who've been evacuated from the northern and southern borders. Following the October 7th attack, I think this one is actually really critical. Israel imposed tough restrictions on the movement of Palestinian workers from the West Bank into the country. That move hit the construction sector, causing labor shortages that became an additional drag on economic growth. So they basically use Palestinians as like day laborers to do the jobs that Israeli citizens don't want to do. And so for all of those workers to effectively be banned and not available for work. I mean, it's been devastating for Palestinians, for the West Bank economy. It also has been really bad for the Israeli economy. In addition, they said imports of goods and services fell 42%, while exports dropped 18%. So you have had this just massive collapse in economic activity. You also have a huge number of Israelis, estimates are around 500,000, who have just left the country and not clear whether or not they're going to come back. So the economic toll of this war on Israel has been really actually quite extraordinary. And this was worse. People knew there was going to be a drop in economic growth. They did not predict anything like 20% on an annual basis.
Well, the imports of the goods falling 42% is also nuts, because Israel obviously is a society that is deeply reliant on import-export. Exports also dropping by 18%. So they've got the high-tech economy that can save them in the future. That's, you know, if sanctions and other things don't go through. But at the very basic level, like what they need to subsist on and then basically becoming a completely backstopped by government spending, that's not a good situation to be in. For their domestic economy, losing all these people. And it just demonstrates too, look, for the Israelis, you want peace. You cannot live this way. You know, having 100,000 people or so, if you guys go to war with Lebanon, you're going to have 1 million people that you're going to have to evacuate, and you're going to pay all their bills. You either got to ship them out of the country, or you're going to rehouse them or something in Tel Aviv, and you got to pay that rent, as we can see, which is bankrupting the government. Not to mention, if you have to recall all those 300,000 reservists, you got to pay them, and you got to try and replace them when there's a labor crisis and all of this. This will basically make you a total war economy. And I was talking about this with Ryan yesterday, but one of the things we were talking in the Russian context too, something that is clear is that when you transition to this, coming out of it is immensely difficult, and you are signing yourselves up for years of inflation, of shortages, of labor disputes. Just look to our own history or any other economy that comes out of this. You want to exit as soon as humanly possible, but I don't think people there have felt it yet. It could actually take a long time before people start to really feel it at that level. But this goes to show that for years and years and years to come, they're going to be grappling with the decisions being made in these more than 100 days.
No doubt about it. And this is why I'm covering today in my monologue there's multiple things happening at the ICJ this week. On Friday, Israel's facing a deadline to prove that they are complying with the injunctions issued by the ICJ with regard to them plausibly committing a genocide. I think they are very much flunking that test. I'll talk more about that in a monologue later this week. But they also are facing these hearings over the illegal nature of their occupation. And, you know, in ordinary times, they could easily shrug this off.
Right.
And it wouldn't matter because, for number one, a lot of the world wouldn't even be paying attention. You know, this international institutions, they have no teeth. They, had an injunction against them, an advisory ruling go against them in 2004. They didn't care. They were supposed to. There's, the barrier wall in the West Bank. They're supposed to take it down. Not only did they not take it down, they actually expanded it. So it shows you how much care and concern they give and credence they give to these decisions that go against them. But you're now at a time where, the economy is in incredibly dire shape. And so the more that these decisions go against you, and the more that you have effectively world pariah status. I mean, this is basically what the BDS movement was trying to accomplish all these years. And it's part of what put pressure on South Africa during apartheid as well, is this, global pariah status that was devastating to the country, to their world prestige, to their economy, et cetera. And so, you are inching closer and closer to that being a reality, which is why some of these things which may not ordinarily matter, like rulings at the ICJ, may have a little bit of a different implication at this particular moment, given the precarity that Netanyahu has steered the Israeli economy and the Israeli society into. For the first time ever, in addition, credit rating agency downgraded Israel. This has never happened before. This was Moody's. We can put this up on the screen. They downgraded Israel's credit rating. This was a couple of weeks ago, citing material, political, and fiscal risk for the country from its war with Palestinian militant group Hamas. The impact of the conflict raises political risk and weakens Israel's executive and legislative institutions, its its fiscal strength for the foreseeable future. Moody's had begun this review for a downgrade on October 19th, and this just came through in early February. The country's rating was cut to A2. That is still 5 notches above investment grade. So it's still like, a solid credit rating, but it's the first downgrade ever in history. And its credit outlook was kept negative by Moody's, meaning that a further downgrade is possible. Bibi was furious about this downgrade, and always, his level of fury is indicative of how much he thinks these things may actually matter and what the consequences could be. Put this up on the screen. He said the decision does not reflect the state of the country's economy. It is entirely due to the fact that we are at war. The rating will go back up as soon as we win the war. So he responded very strongly to this news when this dropped a couple of weeks back.
Well, it obviously matters, like I said, for trade, for your ability to conduct commerce, for exports, imports. It's exactly why we freak out whenever our credit rating goes down, and they're not the world's reserve
Interest
currency.
on loans, et cetera.
Yeah, they have way less. Yeah, they have way more to worry about from an international financial system point of view than we do.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.